memorize 100? I
All right, Nick, I'll be your timer. I'll give you 2-minute warning at 5 minutes, 1 minute warning at 6. The time's up at 7. You have a 15-second grace period. Make sure you hit your 4 sources and be careful of your op count because it could result in a deduction of points. And you can start whenever you're ready.
All right. Psychedelics have a strong place in our Aboriginal past. Almost every single early religion or mysticism contains some degree of hallucination ritual. In particular, South American and Amazonian tribals use dimethyltryptamine and a combination of chemicals in modern antidepressants for their spiritual journeys. According to one Center for Healing and Spirituality study, the plant they used for this contraindication was Banisteriopsis caapi. This plant contains 2 modern precursors for antidepressants, harmine and harlemine. So from these experiences of our ancestors, we can draw a great deal of the contraindication between MAOI psychedelics, SSRI psychedelics, and Indolamine psychedelics. Hello, my name is Nick Stanner, and today I hope to discuss with you the interaction between modern antidepressants, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and their interaction with the most popular type of psychedelics, Indolamines. You can take my credibility because I have taken the research from both sides of the argument and put them together for a logical conclusion. In doing so, I hope to not only educate society, but prevent them from undergoing unintended consequences. So firstly, let's address our first class of substances, Indolamines. What separates Indolamines from other psychedelics is Indolamines operate by looking similar to serotonin. As we can see from this picture, they have a very similar chemical base. Because they look similar to serotonin, they operate by triggering the same receptors in the serotonin receptor site. So this hallucination experience is caused by this artificial stimulation in the brain. Essentially, we receive sensory information about things that aren't really happening. So within the neuron, the serotonin ports are taken from the psychedelic rather than their original chemical, serotonin. Serotonin is responsible for mood elevation, perception, and sensation. So when psychedelics interfere with this, they create these false impressions. So let's now move on to the first type of antidepressants, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Now that's quite a mouthful, so let me explain what monoamine oxidase is, or what I will now refer to as MAO. Monoamine oxidase, or MAO, is an enzyme that exists within the synapse, or where the actual neurotransmitters hit the receptor. Monoamine oxidase, or MAO, breaks down serotonin where it is reabsorbed by the initial neuron. There it is reassembled into serotonin and shot back out to transmit messages. When a psychedelic is introduced into the bloodstream and into the synapse, MAO is responsible for breaking down that psychedelic because it looks similar to serotonin. This is illustrated by this graph because we can see that the yellow rectangle binds to the pink rectangle, thus allowing more blue serotonin into the synapse. So if the reaction between MAO and serotonin is anything like the reaction between MAO and psychedelics, when we inhibit MAO, it would seem that we would have a much more psychedelic response. However, in regards to modern research, there's quite the contrarian facade. In one MAPS.org study, they found that the conjunctive administration of lysergic acid diethylamide 25 and the MAOI antidepressant Marplan almost eliminated the results expected from lysergic acid diethylamide. Additionally, a neuropsychopharmacology study concluded that the administration of DMT with Marplan also obliterated the effects. So how do we interpret these results? Firstly, there are 2 types of MAO, monoamine oxidase A and monoamine oxidase B. Marplan, the monoamine oxidase inhibitor used in these studies, was targeted not at the antidepressant chemical serotonin, but at dopamine. What this meant was that the synapse, as we see here, was flooded with these blue neurotransmitters. If we put them in comparison to the Indolamine psychedelic transmitters, there may be 1 or 2 in comparison to all those other blues. Because those blues are able to block out the receptors from the psychedelics, we get almost no response from the psychedelics. Thus, when we see an MAO-B inhibitor used, we see an almost complete elimination of psychedelic effects. However, if we were to use an MAO-A inhibitor, which destroys this chemical and thus allows the psychedelic to act on the receptor as many times as it wants, it would thus lead to a massive potentiation of effects. Thus, while an MAO-B inhibitor destroys the effects of the psychedelic, an MAO-A inhibitor greatly potentiates these effects. So now let's move on to the most common of antidepressants, the one we've heard so many times in the media, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These were the two antidepressants in the system of both the VTech killer and one of the Columbine killers. From this graph, we can see that the black dots serotonin are stopped from being reabsorbed by the top neuron by the circle SSRI, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors operate like MAOs in that they keep serotonin in the synapse longer, where they activate our receptors. With this serotonin happy chemical hitting our receptors over and over and over again, we naturally lose our depressive feelings. So now let's analyze this chemical in a psychedelic term. So once we introduce the psychedelic into the synapse, the SSRI prevents this psychedelic from being reuptaken into the neuron and thus destroyed. But additionally, because the SSRI causes so much serotonin to be within the synapse, it causes a great deal of competition for the psychedelic with serotonin, much like with MAOB inhibition. Thus, we see that if taking an SSRI increases the amount of serotonin, like with an MAOB, it will virtually destroy the psychedelic effect because now the psychedelic has to compete with our own endogenous neurotransmitters. Furthermore, prolonged use of a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor causes the receptors responsible for serotonin to withdraw within inside the neuron. This is called downregulation. It causes the neuron to receive less excessive stimulation because it has grown habituated to the excessive stimulation. So essentially, when we see a psychedelic introduced into the system of someone who is used to a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, there are far less receptors for that psychedelic to take place and have its effect. Thus, we see with a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, such as Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft, or Sertraline, the essay Psychopharmacologia concluded, in turn with neuropsychopharmacology, that in fact, the administration of these SSRIs actually destroy the effects of the psychedelic drug. Thus, we see that while MAOA increases the effect, MAOB and SSRIs almost destroy the effect. So, in conclusion, let us review the interactions between these types of antidepressants and indolamine psychedelics. When you have an MAOA inhibitor, it greatly increases the amount of the psychedelic because the psychedelic is allowed to stay in the synapse much longer. With an MAOB, it greatly increases the amount of serotonin, the receptor that the psychedelic is trying to imitate, as is the case with SSRIs. So I plead you, the next time you're on an antidepressive schedule, please take note of what substances you're ingesting. Thank you.